Welcome back to the Better People Podcast.
Do I have a goal?
Yeah, what's your goal
Um,
in sharing?
think I think when I'm having conversations like this, and I'm
Hmm.
having more and more of them, is to add to hope that folks would think and see that ugliness inside of them, in the same way that I see it inside of me. Um, it wasn't Christianity that helped me deconstruct like the patriarchy that lived inside of me,
Okay.
the sexism that lived inside of me, the even the racism, even the self hate that lived inside of me. It wasn't Christianity that had helped me move through those things. It was
Hmm.
this other mentor that I had that kind of like talked about like it's impossible to live in America and not be infected with racism against Black people. And so I had to stop and think, like, wait, I've been in America. My racist towards Black people. I had to unpack some of the ways that I thought, the ways that I saw things, the way that I look at poverty. It wasn't
Hmm.
Christianity that undid all of those things. It was, this outside situation while in Christianity. Um, but I think uh, that all of those things, all of those illnesses, the homophobia that lived inside of me, like Christianity that didn't undo that for me. It took an outside entity or an outside influence to help me do that reflection. And I'm hoping that as I'm having this conversation, that folks will look and be like, oh, do I think differently about people who look different than me, that think different than me, that believe different than me? Um, Yeah, and I think the text forms how we continue to live in some of those unhealthy thinking ways of thinking. How we look at women. I think the God is like it feels like he hates women. Um, Old and New Testament throughout there. Like he even has like this scale of like how much people are worth. Like right if like and slaves definitely right aren't considered people. All of those like women are considered property. Um, the Old Testament God says like if this dude rapes this woman, like his punishment is he has to marry her.
But didn't Jesus come to change that? Didn't didn't isn't the Christ presence on the earth here to like wipe all of that out?
When you say wipe all of that out, like undo it,
Not necessarily undo it, but to make things better, to you know, to highlight what love actually looks like.
I think there are texts that where Jesus does that, but I also think that he leans more on this um this supremacy culture that he promotes. Um like as much as family, like there's a lot, Jesus talks a lot about disrupting the family. Like I
Mm.
came to bring sword against mother and daughter, father and son. Like unless you hate yourself, even your own life, even your children, like you gotta like love me more than all this. Um,
So,
dude's dad dies. Like, hey, let me go bury my dad. He's like, nah, you go to bury your dad. Like you're not worthy to follow. Like this dude's. I think like there is this like this. It almost feels anti-family because you have to
mhm,
be part of this family.
mhm.
Um, so, but yeah, as long as you're part of that in group, I think Jesus does talk about that.
Interesting. So, you know what? Let's move to ICE from that lens. Like, let's kind of come down into this. Do you think that this is what does this have to do with Christianity? The view, I mean, the lens in which um, American Christians or Christians as a whole understand what's happening with immigration.
Yeah, I think with ICE, I think their Christians are confused. right? There are these messages where Jesus clearly talks about, like, taking care of, the stranger, taking care of the foreigner, taking care of the less fortunate. Like, he talks about that. But it feels like when you look at where evangelicals land on those types of things, it feels like they're landing on the opposite side of that. Well, why is that? Because the supremacy culture is elevated. The supremacy, like the and we'll just call it supremacy culture, because I think that's what God has with the Israelites. That's what Jesus comes with, his followers. Like, if you're part of us, you're part of this supreme group, and the folks who aren't a part of this aren't. And so when you have those conflicting messages, what's going to rise to the top? Is it going to be those messages around love your neighbor, take care of the stranger, feed the hungry? Like, is that going to rise to the top? Or is it like, it's about us maintaining who we are, making sure that we're not intermixing or intermingling with other folks? Like, which of those messages is going to raise to the top? And I think the one that raised to the top now and throughout history is the supremacy culture. That, hey, if you're not one of us, then you're less than, and whatever happens to you, and even your children. Your children aren't valuable, because again, we see that, like, I think we see throughout the scripture, the way the scripture talks about and engages with children is pretty horrific as well.
What's interesting, Jones, is like I said, I don't know what's going on in the world right now, even as it relates to ICE. And that might be negligent, but I know for years, this is how I feel about it. For years and years and years, I felt like I fought for a certain perspective. I thought, oh wow, we just don't understand. That was always my view. My lens was, if they only understood, if you had this information, then things would change. And that was, what I believed. I still believe that, I still believe that in a sense, but it's kind of changed a little bit. And so um, I'm in
When you
this
say only
space.
understood, if who only understood what?
So if people understood God, if people
Okay.
understood the way God uh, designed things, if people understood the scripture, if people understood what Christianity really is, if people were able to disconnect from maybe some traditional things and really see like the heart of it, the heart of God through scripture, then things would change. And so I would fight for that. I would have different conversations. A lot of work that we did around racial unity was, centered around that. And I mean, just full transparency, I'm exhausted. And I lived for a lot of years in fear, stress, frustration, always trying to herald the message. And I was dying. Truth be told, as far as my health was concerned, just my perspective of people was changing. Love was very difficult to. Uh, I couldn't reason with this love thing, and so I say all of that to say that that's why I'm completely disconnected from it, because I'm trying to save my life. And
Yeah.
I look back at a couple of years ago, some pictures from a couple of years ago. And I say this to Rudy over and over again, this thing was killing us. Like this thing was killing us. I'm like 30 pounds lighter, 30 pounds lighter, and so anyway, all that to just kind of give you some perspective of why I'm out of there. But go ahead.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. Well, first I want to say, like, uh, you got to take care of you, right? You got to take care of yourself. And I don't think there should be any guilt from disconnecting and not having your finger on the pulse of what's happening. I would say we need you back in the game sooner than later, but we'll take your sabbatical, right? And maybe it's not doing that specific work, right? Because oftentimes when we're trying to do race relations work. It is extremely exhausting,
Sure.
especially when to borrow a biblical idea, when the ground isn't fertile, right? Like when you're trying to plant and water on rocky ground, or with where thorns and thistles are, like there's not going to be much growth, and that's what's going to. So I mean, so that work is hard. That work is hard, especially when the ground isn't fertile. And that's not. I don't know the folks she was working with, but not to say that was the ground you was working with. I'm just saying it in general.
Yeah, I mean,
Uh,
it was a lot of different groups, and it was it was painful. I mean, the truth is, and even when I look back and see that people are responding in ways, and a lot of people have a lot to say, you know, to me, real work doesn't happen on social media, and a lot of people are trying to engage it from that space. It's just not a great place to happen. If it's not boots on the ground, then it's like, what are we doing? And so, yeah, but my boots is hanging up. Okay, my boots is
for
hanging
now,
up.
for now, for now, for now.
Listen.
Um, I think to the ICE conversation, I remember when I was entrenched in Christianity and immigration issue would come, the scripture in Hebrews that talks about following the laws of the land. I always like would lean back on that. Like, okay, like, yes, like we want people to be able to come, but like, hey, there's people standing in line trying to get in here. Like everybody needs to get in line, right? And these folks that are coming in legally, it's like they're taking cuts, and that's not fair. And so let's just all follow the rules. Like that was my mentality, 8, 9 years ago. Um, but that's when, and again, the scripture says, kind of have faith in this criminal justice system with the laws of the land and stuff. And I was talking to one time, this was pre-COVID, probably 2018. Um, and she says, the practicing lawyer, she said, yeah, there is no justice in that system. I don't even refer to it as a criminal justice system. I refer to it as the criminal system,
Mm.
um, because it's rigged. It's set up to oppress and to benefit and privilege some and not others. And so she started sharing some of the data and statistics, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, dang, like my go-to has been like, okay, let's just follow the rules. Like at the end of the day, like we have our opinions and our ideas, but at the end of the day, the rules are there. Let's just follow the rules, which is the rules are oppressive, and how the rules are executed are oppressive and unjust. And so when you start to really unpack it and roll back, like we're on like stolen land. Like how can someone be illegal on stolen land? And so that kind of like shifted how I viewed immigration. But I think that is when you ask about like how does the Christian lens play into that? If you're leaning on that scripture, that God breathed text that's telling you, hey, at the end of the day, just follow the rules that the government have set up, like then that lends itself to continue or perpetuating a lot of injustice.
One of
And
the
so
things.
when people see the injustice, when they see the injustice, they like you have this response. If you have a heart, if you have any empathy or compassion, like you see the injustice and it hits you, but you have this again, what's gonna rise higher? It's gonna be that text because God is telling me that we follow the laws of the land and the laws of the land are there. Um, and I think that's
Jones, I think one of the things I think that kind of go back to what I said, I felt like if people would just understand, biblical illiteracy it is what it is. It's always been there, and so oftentimes we're referencing what the scripture says, but the truth of the matter is people don't know what the scripture says. They're really just kind of following, whoever it is that's talking because I mean, there can be you can take a text and two different perspectives come from it from highly intelligent people, and so sometimes it's not about intellect, and that's in one sense, and it's just emotion. It's a view it's the view that you're trying to get to the people, and oftentimes people just lean into, their favorite person, or a lot of times some things are just simply based on how you were trained. And so I say that because when we keep pointing to what scripture says and we act as if people are actually reading the scripture or understand the scripture and are following in that way. No, what's rising to the top is, like you said we're in a supremacy culture. For me, the life that I live right now is I'm working, really hard at decentering myself. If I'm at the center of everything, and that's what America is. It trains us to see ourselves at the center, so much so that sometimes we don't even know this other stuff exists. It's kind of like being from California. When you're from California, it's like you're like, wait, what? Like people be mad at us from other places, and I'm like, wait, but where are you from? Is that in America?
Yeah, it's so fun. I got two really good partners from Ohio and Minnesota. And so when we have conversations, man, these California cats, man, they don't even know basic geography, right? Like, and you just proved that
Yeah, that's the thing, Jones. That's the
because
thing. Because it's not just simply about whether or not I know it. I mean, we learn this stuff in school, but for
for sure.
what? Why do I need to know it? It's California. We can go to the snow and the beach same day.
Yeah, yeah.
Everything's here. You know what I mean? And then it made me understand, like, oh, well, that's probably why people are thinking about us and we're not thinking about them. Like, I don't, for me, but I say that because I've been trained to center myself, even from from
Mhm.
that perspective. So the work that I do every day is to, I'm always assessing myself and with the goal of decentering. I'm trying to move myself out the way and to see things. So I say that when you talk about things rising to the top, yeah, what's going to rise to the top is myself. So it's not biblical perspective necessarily, unless somebody who is centering it is saying so. Because biblical
Positive.
illiteracy is true.
The biblical literacy is I think that's probably more so now than before, but it's been our lifetime. It's been prominent. Um, but I'll ask you this: like that text that obey the laws of the land. I think that's a prominent text. That's something that comes out of the pulpit. I think most Christians can like have heard that before somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
somewhere. They may not know where to find it or the context is in, but they've heard that before. So
Mm-hmm.
that's the first thing. The second thing I want to ask you is when you think about the generation before us,
Mm-hmm.
when you think about like, some specific people come to mind. A lot of our friends from East Side Church of Christ, right? Um, I think there is the centering of self, but I feel like the generation before us, um, I think scripture or their understanding of scripture, draw Christians from that age, the folks who are like 80 now, right? I think scripture or how they understood scripture did drive how they. I think you're right. Less so now. You're right. Now it's more so centering, but the folks who are before us, who have kind of like set the tone of what the culture is now that we're pushing against. I think they
You felt like there was biblical literacy in them.
not necessarily biblical literacy, but I think there was a faithfulness
Oh,
to
okay.
what they understood scripture to mean and say
Okay. Why do
more
you
so
think it
than now.
is? Why? What makes you say that?
Um, because I don't know if you remember, but in the 90s, um, what I remember is like these different churches doing mortgage burning ceremonies and hearing stories about people taking seconds out on their homes to pay towards the building fund so that they don't people didn't own their own homes, but it was very important for us to own the building and the celebration and the pageantry around those types of sacrifices that people were making. People were relocating to serve in the church. And so, I mean, and again, that may just be my limited perspective from what I was seeing out here in the IE and when I was singing in LA. But I felt like there was this commitment and passion to what they believed God wanted them to do. And so when we hear that scripture about like obey the laws of the land, it resonates. And that's what's gonna rise to the top. Do you remember that time? I mean,
I
can
do.
you connect with that when like folks like sacrificing time, energy, and effort? Like like out here we were having like tent meetings and stuff, and folks were like sacrificing, paying money to buy a tent and renting RVs so that put up a tent in a vacant lot, and we had to be there next to it. So I think like those folks embodied sacrificing for what they believe the scripture says.
Sure. I think I do recall that, and I do remember that perspective driven by um people that they trusted. Not necessary. I think this faithfulness came from, something that you mentioned before, that there's this community or family that, this cohesiveness that was present, I think it goes back to that, and that it was not necessarily, I think people were more bought into the community and being right and centering, because our lens, I think that's what you're talking about, is the Church of Christ lens. And the Church of Christ lens is centering, like it is the one true church. And it is at the center, and everyone else is going to hell. That's a centering. And what you get people to buy into that, they're going to sell everything for that, because you told them they're at the center, you're right, God sees you as right and everyone else is wrong, which kind of motivates you to bring everybody to this, to pour all your money into it. Because if you're at the center and everyone else is wrong, then you're trying to bring everybody into that, you know. There's this sense of pride that exists inside of you, because you feel like, you really may not understand why you're the chosen one, why you. Um, but, your heart, because this was true for me, your heart genuinely breaks when you look over and you see that a person doesn't believe the way that you believe. I think that's American. It's like the truth of the matter is, it's not just a California thing. It is, like you mentioned, Bad Bunny talks about Americas, but North Americans aren't thinking about that. As a matter of fact, the United States of America ain't thinking about nobody else. We're thinking about Canada. You know what I mean? Like, so there's a centering inside of America that you would even forget that this is North America and that South America are also Americans. You know what I mean? But that's what it produces. And so everything here comes back to that. Everything, all of the ways in which we engage each other, the way we see Minnesota or the way that we see Ohio or California, it is from a centering space, and it works that way. Everything is kind of set up on that. It has to happen that way. And so that's kind of how I see it. And I see even what people were faithful to in the past. It is, again, to me, the centering of self, the centering of your denomination, and so on and so forth.
I'm
So
processing because it's American and it's biblical.
You've been listening to the Better People podcast, and I hope that you walked away today understanding the value of listening to other people's stories. Please subscribe, share this video, comment, share your opinion.